Panmure House is the final remaining home of Adam Smith, the father of modern economics. It was in this 17th century Edinburgh townhouse that Smith completed the final editions of his two most celebrated works, The Theory of Moral Sentiments and The Wealth of Nations. Smith lived at Panmure House between 1778 and 1790. And across this 12-year period, he was a central figure in a group of celebrated Scottish Enlightenment thinkers who used to convene to share their ideas. Here in Smith's dining room, they would meet to debate and define the most pressing issues of their time. Today, Panmure House serves this crucial purpose once again, but for a 21st century society. Rescued and restored by Edinburgh Business School and Heriot-Watt University, Adam Smith's former home is now a centre for new Enlightenment thinking. All our programmes serve to bring people together for two key purposes. First, to celebrate the work of Adam Smith and its ongoing relevance to society. And second, to engage in debate and research about the great social and economic questions of our time. There are many opportunities for you to participate in Panmure's programmes, no matter where in the world you are. You may wish to view one of our expert lectures, participate in our school's seminar series, or read one of our specially commissioned articles. You might attend one of our events here in Edinburgh, or indeed support us by joining the Society of Panmure House from further afield. Visit our website to find out more about all our programmes, and we'll look forward to welcoming you soon.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the event we have tonight on impactful leadership on sustainability in further and higher education. I'm Andrea Nolan, I'm Principal of Edinburgh Napier University, and I'm chairing the discussion and the talks this evening. And I was particularly delighted actually when Richard asked me, because it's an area I'm grappling with hugely in my institution, with my students and my staff. And I'm a vet. I'm not like Richard, someone who has a history in energy storage and all of the, and like Mercedes. So I'm really hoping to learn a lot this evening. And I'm really hoping we'll be able to do that with your participation when we come to the question and answer. But first I want to welcome you particularly to Panmure House, which is the Adam Smith, the home of Adam Smith, a special venue, and where this very room, I believe, where many edits were made to his famous treatise, if you like, The Wealth of Nations. And I guess many dinners and conversations were held about the state of the world at that time. So it's particularly appropriate that we're talking about something that is so challenging for us all globally now and into the future. Now, about a year ago, before COP26, Panmure House was host to the Hutton Series debates on climate change, and I believe James Hutton, founder of geology, was the executor of Smith's will, so there's a good link there. That series was designed to open discussion around energy, climate change and resource use and availability in recognition of the increasing need for reasoned debate and discussion between industry, NGOs, government and the public. And I was interested in it, and I have what's available on the website for you all. They were tasked, it was tasked, the series, there were six conversations that were from different angles with different contributors to come up with the 10 priorities that we could all sign up to collectively to make a difference and to try and really move ahead on moving to net zero. So I think it's very timely that tonight we are hosting this event just ahead of COP27. And what we're here to do is to engage on the role of universities and colleges and how as leaders we can progress the agenda. And indeed one of the 10 priorities that came out of that series was really galvanising our student community and us as leaders taking brave and bold and positive decisions. So just before I introduce our two speakers for tonight, to remind you there is no fire drill. So if we do hear an alarm go off, I'm not sure what it's like, but I guess we'll probably get a clue from the noise. We go down the stairs the way we came in and out the way we came in. And if you do have phones, I've just checked mine, please put it on silent. That would be much appreciated. We are going to have, the talk is being videoed. The Q&A session isn't, but the talk will be, so as we can share it, the discussion, the presentations, so as we can share it with people who couldn't be here tonight, and that there'll be, I think there will be quite a lot of people who want to watch this. There are ones, so I'm going to hand over to Richard and then Mercedes, and then we will sit down and have a Q&A. And just before I introduce Richard, there are 3 areas that we're specifically looking to explore and would welcome your contributions. The first is about raising ambition, confidence and purpose of our students, for our students and the wider institutional community. So kind of building a confidence and a sense of positivity that we can and will make a difference. The second was about around driving and developing new forms of research funding and green finance partnerships. And there are colleagues from different sectors in the room tonight, so we should be able to progress relationships and networks. And thirdly was around identifying methods of expressing institutional pathways to net zero. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Professor Richard Williams, Principal of Heriot-Watt University, and he also has a tremendously distinguished record, before you move another step, in mineral, I have to say this, mineral engineering, energy storage systems and environmental technology. So we have a great wealth of expertise alongside the leadership. So over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Well, thank you for setting the scene, and thank you everybody for coming and joining in our discussion today. And Professor Mercedes Meritavala and I are seeking to share our experiences and thoughts for what I hope will be a useful discussion together. And the reason we're here tonight is actually, I think we all share a common interest in this very critical topic. For some of us in the room here, we have direct responsibilities for driving forward leadership in sustainability in our own organisations. And of course, this is particularly important, as Andre has mentioned. I think there are particular responsibilities and opportunities that are at our feet as leaders of largely charitable organisations and places of learning. I should say at the outset that neither I or Mercedes claim any supreme capabilities in this domain. But as we look forward to COP27 in Egypt in coming days, we did feel in our hearts we wanted to crystallise discussion in this whole topic and to share our own thoughts, since we believe that, of course, as an educational sector, we do have a responsibility to be much more expressive in this area as leaders. So at Heriot-Watt, we've been pursuing what I would describe as a positive education pedagogy. And this means that we place a strong focus on our individual and organisational purpose. In fact, many hundreds of students and many staff, and indeed some members of our governing body, have developed their own expressions of a sense of purpose in the form of describing the impact they want to have on the world. And I would like to share with you my own purpose, because I also have an impact statement. And as Andrea said, I'm an engineer. So I would describe myself as an innovator and a driver of change. And my purpose is to bring enjoyment and security of life to others by creating a globally sustainable society. As an engineer, I truly believe that. Some people say, how would you describe an engineer? I say, the purpose of an engineer is to bring joy to life. That's the purpose of engineering, to bring joy to life. And there is no technical reason in global society today why the world should not enjoy satisfactory life in terms of access to water, to food, to housing, to medical care, to energy. But of course, we all know that the sustainability drivers are far more complex than just relying on technology alone, and we'll explore that tonight. So in the remarks that I'll be making along with Mercedes, we've decided we're going to suggest 6 priorities for leadership in further and higher education. these are things that go beyond the obvious of reskilling human talent. Take that for granted, that's what universities will be doing. But we're really focusing tonight on leadership. So let's get going with the first. And the first is, why does addressing the climate challenge feel such an insurmountable peak for so many? It just feels so tough and ungraspable, doesn't it? So that's the first area to think about that. Well, of course, as an engineer working in higher education, I have seen how technology can drive societal change. And I guess I feel personally more confident that with a targeted and ambitious mindset, there is no reason that a net zero outcome could not in theory be reached. I have great hope that we can do that. That's my own experience. And indeed, as a leader of an institution for our own university, I believe that we should be globally fossil free of the effects of fossil fuel combustion within a generation. So globally free of the effects of fossil fuel combustion within a generation. And I believe that we can do that. The key here is that the solution and pathways also have to be global and ethical, because right-mindedness of any one nation, of course, won't accomplish the global task. As Andrea had mentioned in the introduction, over a year ago here at Panmure House and online, we sought to identify 10 key actions and principles to drive global sustainability in this debate series. And actually, one of the principal conclusions of that, one of those 10, was this need to raise ambition and confidence to face up, to address the challenges that lie ahead. And actually, as I was thinking, glancing back a year, I was thinking, have we got more confidence or less confidence? Actually, this is still the imperative. We still need to drive up confidence and ambition. Because of course the uncertainties in the world arising from the wars, from energy shortages, from food shortages, from political ineffectiveness, and of course all the geopolitical flux has in fact deflected us, hasn't it, in some ways, and deflected intended pathways in our own lives. And this whole trilemma that is often expressed of this tension between energy security, affordability and sustainability, it's become unbalanced. At first our emphasis was on security, and now we're thinking a bit more about affordability, and of course coming to terms to the potential downplaying of sustainability. So I share this only from the point of view of saying we mustn't pretend that this is simple. It isn't simple. And what we have in common tonight is that we are all learning together how we can navigate this complex space. So that's a reality, it's complex. Achieving net zero we know is not simple. Everything needs to be on the table. And of course, even prior to the perturbations we had coming out of the Ukraine, governments have focused very much, and we've all agreed on the diagnosis of climate change, but largely we failed to articulate pathways to achieve sustainable outcomes. And as a result, our citizens, our students at the university, and politicians are often confused and worried, and in some cases panicked. This is the reality. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty. And the resultant well-intentioned wish to do something sometimes results in rash decisions, underpinned by poor judgments, absence of factual evidence, and sometimes the instigation of major projects that present acute economic wastefulness, in my view, and focus on the wrong priorities being baked in and forming national policies. And I'll say something about that a bit later. But the truth is that most genuine mitigations for climate change are long-term, and this needs to be presented and committed to. But of course, it's quite difficult to do this in a political environment where partisans' views often try to divide and play one thing off against another, rather than coming together to corral best practice. So the political landscape maybe tends to defer to timidity instead of ambition. Politics doesn't like risk, and we're in areas where different things need to be tried, and some will work and some won't work. That's the reality, and we need to allow ourselves to get into that space. Now, of course, Scotland can, I think, get ahead in the game here to address its integrated approach to outcomes that are aligned to the UN sustainability goals and through its helpful national performance framework. But of course, we need future pathways for local, for national and global action to be elucidated. So here we are sitting in the room where Adam Smith edited some of his later editions of his magnus opus, The Wealth of Nations, right here in this space where we are sitting, that had a massive impact on the world. And in the foyer downstairs this evening, you may have seen a little book in the glass case that's called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. I like The Theory of Moral Sentiments, not least because it's a little book. And I can summarize that little book in a sentence, and it says, act as if the world and the people around you were always observing your actions. That's my summary of the Theory of Moral Sentiments. And I think that's a good philosophy. If someone was observing our actions, what would they say? What would we want them to see? And the Theory of Moral Sentiments also talks about the importance of happiness, social happiness. And again, that's important, and we shouldn't forget that. So I think Adam Smith would be very ambitious for net zero, very ambitious for thinking about the whole systems in the world that need to change to enable us to trade in a different way. So our first leadership recommendation is we must lead out and recalibrate the mood from one of despair to one of confidence and ambition, so that we can really address climate change challenges. We must be confident and ambitious, and we must feel it in our heart and believe it. And I believe that's what we can do better as universities. My second question, and it's slightly shorter, you'll be pleased to know, is so what about education? Why is it the net zero challenge is such a wicked problem for us all that we can barely grasp it or understand where to start? Well, this goes back to my earlier point that public and professional communications have focused too much on diagnosis. We all know there are issues. It's been well diagnosed, but not enough on helping ourselves and people to understand and see real pathways to a solution, pathways that are medium term and long term. We need to know in our hearts, how are we going to get there? How can we give people hope and confidence if we're not able to map out some of the scenarios going forward and just say, well, trust us, it's quite complex, we'll get there in the end? That's not sufficient. We have to do more than that. We need to recover this sense of hope, which I think will only come when we have a better ability to help people understand some of the detail of the pathway. Now, we've backed some pretty big Trojan horse projects in the UK and in other countries, such as vehicle electrification, which in itself, whilst being big business, cannot deliver a net zero world. And in my personal opinion, some of these projects have been baked into our national expenditure without proper consideration of the true carbon footprint or the resources needed for cars, batteries, and the systems to operate them. I was speaking to a class at the university. We sometimes run classes around all of our locations, and it's quite a big class. I think there are about 400 students in it, talking about my view on sustainability. And I said, you as students, in 2022, you as students, if we want to electrify our nation and parts of the world that have electric vehicles in your lifetime, we are going to need 4.7 billion tonnes of copper to be mined. Our current reserves, by the way, are 880 million tonnes. We're going to need 681 million tonnes of vanadium. Current reserves are 24 million. 9 billion tonnes of graphite, current reserves 320 million tonnes. I won't go on, but you kind of get the idea. We've set up a fantasy proposition that through electrification we can solve these issues. It is not true. But that's the situation that we are in. It's misleading. So I've yet to see a credible plan for how we're going to implement electrification and indeed the use of electric vehicles. And I think we need to get real with the data. That's not to say these things are not helpful to change people's mindsets and get our minds in the right position, because I think it is. But we have to help people understand there's no silver bullets. So how have we got into this situation? Well, I think it's because we haven't really understood the underlying data in our decision making. We haven't focused on the right things. Activists, for example, would often pick air travel, which of course we need to consider. But let's get real with the data. You know, a personal CO2 tariff in the membership of your golf club is far more than your air travel you're likely to do in a year. Your membership of a football club, do you know the CO2 footprint associated with that? You will be utterly amazed at that. So we need to understand that even CO2 in the digital world now exceeds air transport and is growing internationally at an alarming rate. Well, not alarming, because we are working with digital systems. If the internet was a nation, it would be placed as the fourth largest CO2 emitter behind the USA, China and India, and ahead of Russia. We need to get hold of the data. So the second recommendation is it's imperative that we all understand in here and in here basic information about emissions so we can make wise choices. I think individual choice is going to be one of the major drivers for change in climate for the future. And the more we can help people understand the data and make choices, that's helpful. And at the university, we're trying to do that. We are an unusual university. We operate in 6 locations in 3 countries. Only about a third of our students are here in Scotland. And we're committed next year to providing carbon literacy programs in the form of micro-credentials for all our students, all our staff, and 152,000 alumni. We're also committed to developing a cyber-physical net zero community hub, a physical and a cyber place where we can demonstrate our organisational response to climate change, provide community education, and showcase hands-on technology to help people understand basic things like what is a phase change material, how can that help us in cooling, how does my ground source heat pump work, should I give up membership of my golf club? So we need to help people understand these things. So we hope to take up this responsibility in Edinburgh and across our other sites to work with the community to improve their data. So my third point for activity is, why is it that we don't have a clear pathway for solving climate challenges articulated for our organisations, our cities, our regions, our nations and the world? Well, everything's interconnected, isn't it? It's quite difficult to do this. But taking time to work things out shouldn't be confused with fudging or greenwashing. It is a reality that it's complex, but we need to find better ways of expressing this complexity so people can understand it. So we need clear articulation of pathways to achieve sustainability ethically without being diverted by the noise and confusion of various sort of activist interests. So we must learn how to rationalise and frame the forward agenda. How do the Sustainable Development Goals work? Should we be explaining it through the concepts of planetary health? So how we frame the argument, how we describe the progress, we've got to get smarter at doing that. Universities and our national academies, I think, have big responsibilities in this area, not least because governments find it very difficult to do. And I do believe there's a space here for universities and our academies to gamify the options, to explain it more clearly. And I hope that universities can lead out and colleges and give clarity on their own pathways with confidence and help people in the communities around us to understand what some of these options are and how it's working. So the suggestion here is that college and university leaders can choose to lead out more in demonstrating our own organisational pathways to going to net zero and beyond net zero, and also joining in the call for our national academies and of course governments to do the same, but we could set the lead. So I'm going to stop talking and hand over to Mercedes, who's going to talk about a couple of points where universities are very well placed to take up leadership positions to support local and global society. And I would just like to say that I don't regard a university as some sort of sector, compartmentalise it as some sort of industrial sector. I regard a university as a platform for society, and as a global lighthouse. It's the route that is, for us, we've been around 200 years at Heriot-Watt. These are very stable platforms that give stability to society and international connections. So a very special resource and have a very special potential power for the future. So Mercedes, why don't I swap position with you?
Thank you. So I'm doing this double act with Richard, and he said he was going to be doing the singing, so I think I'm doing the dancing then. We'll sort it out at the end who did what. So I'm delighted to be here, and I think it's always good to put things a little bit in context, and I would like just to run a little bit, a few numbers with you, and probably some of you may be very quick picking these ones. But I'm just going to throw 3 numbers and see if you can find a correlation here. So those 3 numbers are 280, 380, and 420. Any takers what any of those numbers may be? The 420 is probably a clue. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I think a lot of people knew. I think you've probably been the brave one, so but well done to you. So yes, so those are the 3 numbers. So 280 is the CO2 ppms in the atmosphere pre-industrial revolution. 380 is actually, 280 also goes actually precisely, because I checked this morning, to 1776. And that's actually when Wealth of Nations was published. So that's precisely the ppms in that year. 380 is actually the ppm CO2 concentration when Heriot-Watt acquired Panmure House. And 420 is this year. So if you do some very quick calculations, we went from 1776 to 2008 with less than 1 ppm per year. And since 2008 till 2022, we've been going over 3 ppms per year. And this is not related because we acquired Panmure House, by the way. For those of you, making some sort of funny or strange connections, we are not going to be responsible for the 3 ppms per year. But think about that, how quickly things are changing, right? How quickly it's changing, and think I'm putting it into context. Because going back to one of the messages that Richard was already sharing, is that I do think, and I look at myself sometimes in terms of, we go and we give these messages, and we talk about gigatons, and we talk about ppms. And more often than not, I wonder whether did that message really sink in? Did it really help in terms of moving the dial on sustainability? So I hope thinking in terms, in a very short periods, how quickly things are changing and will continue changing. Anyway, but now going back to what Richard really asked me to do, and that's really to cover 2 questions. So the first question I'm going to cover is how should we approach the adoption of a net zero strategy in university leadership? So that's a big one to start, and following with the thinking that Richard has taken us. So just a few comments, observations, and then we hope to discuss a lot more with you after our 6 points. So I think I'm going to start stating the obvious, but sometimes it's necessary to start there. And climate change, as we know, is not only a science or a technical challenge, it's so much more than that. And it has to do also with the social, economic inequalities. And universities, yes, we are key. And we are doing really transformative research in terms of how we can address the science, the technology, the policy, helping providing that evidence. But I don't think we are doing still enough. I don't think we should stop in there yet. And really, we should be looking, as places of higher education, we should be thinking about how we can show leadership in addressing this climate crisis at our own institutions. So we can really lead in terms of what we are doing here. And I think I would say probably nearly all colleges and universities, they have declared some net zero strategies, or working on that. Probably because they feel it's a bit of a governance pressure that they have to do it. And of course, because we also have to comply with governance requirements and reporting requirements. But if you look and go back, actually some figures I pick up, October 2021, so that's about a year ago, Universities UK actually reported that pretty much almost all universities in UK, they're really moving themselves towards declaring a net zero target. But actually also what they look as well in the survey done around the same year, and a survey of estates directors, is that about a quarter only, they really have a plan that they could actually grasp into that. They could really say how they're going to get there, only a quarter of them. And also one could wonder as well whether are we really setting up challenging targets? Are we really, is 2050 which decade? So we'd really be aiming for net zero and beyond net zero within this decade. Are those targets really challenging and stretching us enough? Or maybe we are really falling a bit short here. And this is really also quite an interesting point, because it's how do we define net zero? It's a matter of choice to some extent, and it's a matter that sets the ambition. Are we maybe just feeling in a comfortable space, just saying scope 1 and scope 2? I know how to measure those ones, and I'm going to pick some scope 3. Are we really leading here in the sector? And it's really that responsibility that we have in terms of making sure that we are setting those targets. And there is, of course, and some of us maybe actually are hiding behind there about, do we have really standardized emissions, ways to reporting all this scope 1, scope 2, and 3? But I think we also could say as well confidently that we are getting there. In Scotland, for instance, doesn't happen in the rest of the UK, but in Scotland we have to report under the mandatory PBCCD process. And it's actually, many of you may know, because you may be involved, it's also with EAUC and the Department for Education, that is actually an exercise, well, more than that, it's a framework that is being set up to reporting. It's a framework for reporting CO2 emissions, so greenhouse gas emissions, and that's going to be standardized. So work is happening in that space. And actually, this is also part, as you probably know, it's going to be part of the Department of Education Sustainable and Climate Change Strategy. And that's also part, as some of you know, particularly colleagues in Heriot-Watt, who are involved in this Queen's Platinum Jubilee Challenge, and is part of that. And what the framework is going to aim, the framework is looking, is to actually have that standardized reporting for the emissions, so really we can understand where our emissions, where our contributions are. And it's only when you go there, and now it's probably the engineer in me talking, it's only when you know how some things really work and how you can actually manipulate them, that really we are going to be able to get into these targets and get it into these science-based target approaches as well. That is very important. And I'm particularly pleased because I can see that Heriot-Watt is actually one of the 21 institutions that is working in this framework, and actually we're using a science-based target in terms of our developing our net zero plan. But I've been talking maybe too much about CO2 and greenhouse emissions, and we know sustainability is a lot more than that. We need to keep this in mind. Let's not just focus on this net zero that seems to be very topical. We need to consider, and Richard already mentioned our Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. We really need to look at sustainability as a whole. This is not a matter of picking and choosing. This is a matter of really doing a holistic work here. And really in the run-up to COP27, only a few days to go there, it's been a clear message in terms of setting up for higher education that responsibility in terms of lead on a net zero initiatives, but also how by doing that we can really transform the economic landscape for the better. And again, I was looking at some figures, and sometimes can be a bit worrying, but I think we need to be aware of that, of 102 respondents that were as part of the report looking in terms of the annual SDG progress in 2022 published. If you look at the 102 respondents, only around 27% they say they really are embedding SDGs across the institution. They're really embedding them. And at Heriot-Watt, what we have done is we have recognized that a strategic approach, and that will be required to embed SDGs across our institution, across our 6 locations, is going to require that senior leadership. It's going to require many things, but senior leadership is going to be one of them. And that's why we're really pleased as well to say that we are the first institution in Scotland who has appointed a deputy principal for global sustainability. And as some of you know, you are looking at her as well. But that aside, I think is what I'm really, really excited and really pleased is really about this opportunity to build this sustainability team. And we have a few colleagues with us in the room here to really be able to coordinate, to support, to enact our commitment to global sustainability. And we are making a clear pledge here. And our pledge, as Richard will be able to share with you as well, is actually key announcements in our graduation ceremonies. Richard already said that we are actually building a public-facing net zero community. And also very important as well, we are collaborating across the sector and the importance of partnerships, so we really can actually understand and charter the most effective pathways to net zero. So in summary, in this point, climate crisis is intrinsically and interdisciplinary, it's an intersectional challenge, but it's only if we work together that we have our biggest chance of really solving the climate crisis. And this will allow us actually, by working together, to look at really those wicked problems, those really challenging areas, whether it's the scope 3, whether it's how we're going to be addressing emissions, greenhouse to our procurement chains. And that's really very important that we do it. So I hope this is something we may want to discuss further and we pick up in the discussion, how we can lead and support and make headway in this area. So the 4th recommendation that we have is really, we have here is that universities can develop a stronger, I would say, national leadership voice, that we can do that between us, and that will help us really to articulate those pathways going beyond net zero for our organizations, but also will allow us to take on board some of those really wicked, complex problems. And again, this is something we'll be doing together, and it will allow us to drive change in Scotland. So I'm going to move now to the 5th point to cover, and that's what leverage can universities bring to accelerate decarbonization nationally and globally. And here the example I want to put is really how universities are already, this is not something we plan to, we are already making significant contributions, important contributions through our ongoing and new partnerships. So we are able to actually co-develop this knowledge, these practices, and really that's what is needed for economic and ecological sustainability. And the EIA report actually had many good graphs as usual back the report they published last year, but there was one that really stuck to me, and that was without international collaboration it's going to take us another 40 years to meet net zero target. So we are looking at 2090 and we cannot go beyond 2050. So think about the importance of that collaboration. There is targets much more closer to us. We need to be able to take our CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions in general by 50% by 2030. And some of you that work with me, you probably hear me saying this, I really keeps me awake at night to think that that's less than 90 months away. And this is in no mean to be a sort of an alarmist, to be in a sort of a doom and gloom. This is about understanding where we are and making sure that we take action because we need to take a stock where we are. So that's really the message here. It's a message of action. It's a message of setting up, increase the pace and the scale of what we are doing. And that's because really the 2020s are a critical decade. We are in this critical decade where we have to realize the opportunities for the energy transition, and we can do that together. And there are sectors, as we know, that they are going to be particularly difficult to decarbonize, but I think as all engineers, we always like the good challenges, you know, the difficult ones. And one that many of you know as well, we are working and personally working is on industrial decarbonization. How we can take our really energy-intensive sectors that provide in the order of 9% of our GDP. And that's actually small. I was talking with other countries last week, and they are much higher GDP value, but we do want to keep that GDP. We want to increase it. We want to get 2 million green jobs by 2030, and those are the doors that we can open. We want to keep our existing jobs. We want to make sure that we keep also these 320 billion, the sporting gods of our industry. And these are industries not only to produce the cement and steel that we are here, but they are producing the medicines. The manufacturing sector was producing the COVID vaccine. The manufacturing sector is also responsible for producing PVs for photovoltaics, the panels. So think about how interrelated everything else. And let's not forget also about green skills. Any energy transition will be underpinned by a skills transition, so we need to keep that in mind. And at Heriot-Watt, we are actually leading the Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre, IDRIC for short, so I'm really glad we found a short acronym to be able to, that rolls the tongue as well. But we are leading it from here, we're leading it from Scotland. This is a UK national centre. It's a centre that is underpinning the research and innovation and is actually going to support the development of the first world net zero within the UK. And that's really the goal. We are mission driven. And how we're doing this? We are doing this because we are doing it in partnership. We have over 142 partners working with us. Half of those are industry. We're working very closely with them, and what we have been able and successfully do with IDRIC is around the community. We are able to connect, we are able to build, and we are able to empower. And as a result of all those, what happens is that we have a community, an industrial decarbonisation community, that is not only proactive in taking the challenge, but is impactful. And we can see that already happening. But decarbonisation relies on that precisely, on all of us coming together. And innovation is key. The role of universities will be now more key than ever. And we saw that coming out of COVID. We saw that the vaccines and all the underlying research that happened before that. We saw that we were able to come up with new ways of communicate and relate and do that in a much more effective way. And that's the same that is going to happen with decarbonisation. 50%, or if you want, half of the global CO2 emissions as of today, they don't have a technology, a technique, a process that is ready to be deployed in the market. The good news is that 50% we do have, and we should get going with those ones, and we should improve those ones at the same time that we develop technologies needed for that other 50%. So again, the role of universities working in partnerships where this urgent innovation is needed, how we can accelerate it into bringing to market. And this is not just about technologies. We have heard about carbon capture, utilization and storage, or hydrogen, fuel flexibility, renewables. There are many things. There is no silver bullet, as Richard already shared with us. But it's not only technologies, it's solutions. It's a whole system that we need to understand. And it's actually a policy and regulatory framework as well that we need to be developing together. And going then in terms of just closing, this decarbonisation is a global effort. I hope that was something or some of the points that I illustrate. We need to implement world-leading innovation. We need to do this in partnership so we are able to catalyze the opportunities that we have across a number of sectors. So in closing, really the recommendation for this point we have here, number 5, is that, and this point actually is really good to be able to say this is something is already happening, is already in action. This is not just something we wish. Is already happening, is here, is that we need to clock, we need to really get with us the fact that the Scottish universities and the sector is already working with hundreds of companies through a number of different mechanisms, from partnerships to research contracts through our alumni. And it's really that is going to be the way taking us forward at the pace and scale we need to address the challenging problems that we have and advance solutions. Thank you.
So we'll dance around here, Mercedes. And just to close now, before we get into discussion about the last point, and energy transition means turning so many things on their head, isn't it? Including, I think, the financial sector. So what might be the financial opportunities for further and higher education in working with the financial sector, in looking to do things in a new way? Mercedes has already focused on possible role of universities, which of course for centuries have been the lighthouses for the futures, curators, conveners, through their ideas and inventions. And Scotland is blessed with 19 universities and very many colleges. And that means that we have capability to help shape the future, significant capability. But some change is needed, I think, in our innovation processes. I admit to feeling slightly aggravated sometimes when people say to me, oh, why hasn't it got its Silicon Valley, like as if we're deficient? And I think that's interesting. Of course, we want to have ideas that go through to innovations that create high value. But my idea of Silicon Valley is often ideas that proceed very fast. The idea is sold out, everybody makes a fast buck, and things move on. And of course, Scotland does need high value growth companies like that. But actually, I think we are in need of some different thoughts around innovation, because many of the more radical innovations to address the 50% of issues that aren't covered off by technology are going to take a longer time to develop. For some of these ideas, they may not be business models or markets that are going to drive the change at the moment. So if we're going to encourage more radical innovation to address some difficult technical problems, we're going to need a different form of innovation. I remember this myself in working for a while at another university where we had a terrific radical innovation. I've worked a bit in radical innovation. My definition of that is that when you first hear the idea, you smile and you laugh, and yet it's so simple. These are some of the criteria of a radical innovation. But in this particular idea, it was an idea of washing clothes without using water. And the idea worked. It worked amazingly well. In fact, it was so simple, people couldn't believe it would work. But of course, it did away with conventional washing machines. It did away with conventional detergents. And so it was a highly disruptive technology, which it was not possible to raise money for because it was so disruptive, it couldn't find its way in the marketplace. It's taken 10 years for that idea and that technology that works magnificently using 5% of the water of conventional washing machines, 30% of the energy and no use of detergents to take up and now become standard practice in a number of hotel chains now in California. So there's an example of something everybody wanted it to work, but there wasn't a business system there to make it happen, and that's often the case with radical innovation. So what we need is investment which is relating to areas of what I would call more patient capital, where the investment is not based on a fast return, but based on a longer term return that would have financial value, but also would have significant social value. If we're to address climate change issues in our universities, we're going to need to access investors and research funders who value societal impact above short-term gain. And I think that's what many people in society are looking for. It's going to require the executors of research to be very committed, because some of the research we're going to need to do is going to take 10 years. We're going to have to reconfigure our research groups such that they aren't going to be at the mercy of a single professor when the professor moves on or decides they want to do something different. We're going to have to reconfigure our teams to do a creation to community embedding, which is like a decade. We're thinking about how we should do that at Heriot-Watt because it's very, very important, I think. So that will involve a complete redesign of concepts of what a research and innovation team is. Now, there's growing interest in long-term capital, and organisations have been developed to foster and promote and audit and demonstrate its value to saver communities. And a lot of this interest is supported by pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurers and asset managers who share a common interest in looking at long-term investments with societal value. And we need to get closer to understanding the mindsets of these organisations and helping them to see if there are new ways of working with us in universities to look at our portfolios of more radical inventions. In such funds, I think measures of success are best expressed in terms of what is the likely yield in saving tons of CO2 per pound invested. We need to be thinking, how can we develop a dialogue along these lines? So I hope that we may see, and by working with people in this room and others, new climate tech or other forms of climate bonds for research, because we'd like to see how we could be part of that. And that involves all sorts of new things that would happen in maturation of some of these bonds and trading of carbon credits. There's all sorts of systems associated with this that haven't yet been thought through. But we do know there's going to be humongous global financial losses if climate mitigation isn't addressed. And it's quite a chilling backdrop, actually, that we need to face up to. So my final observation is that in universities, I know we will be keen to work with others to find new and major forms of, I'll call it green finance, it's a rather broad description, that will bring research and education income, new forms of research and education income to universities. Not just because universities want to have new income, but because we want to have an impact on the world, and it's in our charitable objectives to do that. And I think there could be some new forms of funding to allow us to do it. So we've gone through our 6 points. Thank you so much for your patience. We're confident that there's great opportunity for Scotland's further and higher education sector to build confidence, to think in new ways together, and to really make sure we're driving forward leadership in this area. So thank you for listening. And I'm now going to pass over to our chair to allow us to discuss matters further. Thank you.